It's 12,000 years ago. You're crouched next to a fire in a cold, marshy plain, somewhere that will one day be called Utah. It's the tail end of the Ice Age. You're tired, you're freezing, and to keep the flames alive, you grab a handful of little wild plants and toss them in. And as the smoke curls up, you catch a smell. Sharp, bitter, kind of amazing. Your name is, well, we don't actually know your name, so let's call you Juniper. And Juniper has no idea that the plant now crackling in that fire is about to start one of the longest, weirdest, most stubbornly human habits of all time. Because those little plants, that was tobacco. And that smoke drifting up into the freezing air is the very beginning of a 12,000-year story about people, fire, and the strangely universal urge to breathe in smoke on purpose. So, let's actually answer the question. When did ancient humans start smoking? And honestly, why would anyone do that in the first place? Question 1. What even counts as smoking? Because when you hear the word, your brain probably jumps straight to a cigarette, a vape, somebody standing outside a gas station at midnight. But strip all that away, and smoking is shockingly simple. You burn a plant, and you breathe in what comes off it. That's it. That's the whole trick. And once you define it like that, you realize smoking isn't some modern invention that showed up with factories and packaging. It's ancient, it's global, and humans have been doing it in one form or another for basically as long as we've had control of fire and a reason to get curious about it. That's basically the prehistoric version of it started as a dare and became a lifestyle. Question 2. Okay, so how far back does it actually go? This is where it gets wild. Remember Juniper by that Ice Age fire? That's a real place. It's called the Wishbone Site, out in the Great Salt Lake Desert, and archaeologists dug it up just a few years ago. In the middle of an ancient hearth, a 12,300-year-old fireplace, they found 4 tiny charred seeds. And those seeds were wild tobacco. Nicotiana, attenuata, if you want to sound smart at parties. 4 little burnt seeds sitting in the ashes of a hunter-gatherer campfire, older than farming, older than pottery, older than pretty much everything we think of as civilization. Now, real talk, because this channel doesn't do fake certainty. 4 seeds by a fire doesn't automatically prove somebody was puffing on a pipe. They might have chewed the leaves. They might have sucked on them for the buzz and spat out the stems. But it does prove one thing rock solid. Humans were deliberately using tobacco 12,000 years ago. That single discovery pushed the record back by almost 9,000 years overnight. Before it, the oldest hard evidence was a set of pipes from what's now Alabama, around 3,000 years old, with actual nicotine residue baked into the clay. And residue in a pipe? That's not a maybe. That's a smoking gun. Literally. That's basically the archaeology version of finding someone's fingerprints on the cup. Question 3. Fine. But why tobacco? Why would humans look at a bitter, slightly toxic plant and go, yeah, let's make this a whole thing? 2-part answer. Part 1. Nicotine. Tobacco is loaded with it, and nicotine does something to your brain. A little alertness, a little buzz, a little calm. Your body notices. And here's the uncomfortable part. Nicotine is addictive, and it was just as addictive 12,000 years ago as it is today. Ancient people weren't immune. If anything, they felt it fresh. But part 2 is the part everybody gets wrong. For most of human history, in most of the cultures that used it, tobacco was not a casual little pick-me-up. It was sacred. Across the Americas, where tobacco actually comes from, smoking was ceremony. The pipe was holy. Smoke was seen as a way to carry your words, your prayers, your intentions up to the spirit world. People smoked to seal agreements, to mark a birth or a death, to make peace between groups, to heal. This wasn't a vending machine at 3 in the morning. This was the most serious, most meaningful thing you could do with your breath. That's basically the ancient version of lighting a candle in a quiet room. Except the smoke is the message. and the message is going somewhere that matters. Question 4. Okay, but it wasn't only tobacco, right? Humans didn't just smoke one plant. Correct, not even close. Fly halfway around the world, into the Pamir Mountains of western China, up around 3,000 meters, and you'll find a 2,500-year-old cemetery called Jersenkal. And in the graves, wooden braziers, basically little bowls with burnt residue inside. Scientists ground up bits of those braziers, ran the chemistry, and found it cannabis. And not the weak, wild stuff. This was cannabis with unusually high levels of the psychoactive compound, which is the tell. High levels don't happen by accident. Somebody was either selecting stronger plants or seeking them out on purpose. The picture the researchers paint is honestly kind of cinematic. Mourners in a mountain tomb, hot stones dropped into the braziers, cannabis piled on top, the whole enclosed space filling with smoke like incense, while music played on a wooden harp. Smoke as part of a funeral, a way to send someone off. That's basically the ancient version of everyone lighting up at a memorial so the room feels full of the person you lost. And it doesn't stop there. Zoom out across the whole ancient world and you find the same instinct on repeat. Temples burning frankincense and myrrh, aromatic herbs thrown on coals in rituals from the Mediterranean to India to the Americas, different plants, different continents, people who had never met and never could, all landing on the exact same idea. Fragrant smoke is powerful, holy, worth making on purpose. When humans invent the same weird thing independently, over and over on every continent, that's usually a clue that it's tapping into something really deep in us. Which brings us to the big one. Question 5. Why did humans start doing this at all? What's the origin story? Nobody has a video of the first person to ever inhale smoke on purpose, so scientists work with theories. But they're good ones. Theory 1 is my favorite, and it's almost embarrassingly simple. The campfire. Humans have been sitting around fires for hundreds of thousands of years. Cold nights, long hours, nothing to do but feed the flames. Of course we threw things in, leaves, seeds, dried plants, whatever was lying around. And every so often, one of those plants gave off a smoke that smelled incredible, or made your head feel a little different. And once that happens even once, you remember it. You do it again. You do it on purpose. That's basically the origin of an entire habit born out of being bored next to a fire, which, honestly, is the most relatable thing our ancestors have ever done. Theory 2. Ritual. Watch a fire and tell me smoke doesn't feel like it's going somewhere. It rises. It disappears into the sky. To a lot of ancient cultures, that made smoke the perfect messenger. Something that could travel from the world you can touch up to the world you can't. If you wanted to reach the gods, the ancestors, the spirits, smoke was the delivery service. And theory 3, medicine. A lot of these plants genuinely do something to the body: pain, alertness, calm, sleep. So early healers experimented, and smoke was one of the ways they delivered the dose. Accident, ritual, medicine. Realistically, probably all three at once, tangled together over thousands of years. Last question, the uncomfortable one. So, how did sacred smoke turn into a cigarette? Here's the twist. For most of its history, tobacco was trapped, and it only grew in the Americas. So, for thousands of years, the rest of the planet had literally never heard of it. Then, 1492 happens. Columbus crosses the ocean, sees indigenous people smoking, and sailors carry the plant back to Europe. And Europe loses its mind over it. Within about a century, tobacco went from unknown plant on a faraway continent to a global craze growing on nearly every inhabited landmass. Fast forward a few hundred more years, add factories, add mass production, add advertising, and the sacred ceremonial smoke of the Americas becomes the mass-produced, chemically boosted, wildly addictive cigarette. Same plant, completely different meaning. We took something people once treated as holy and used a few times a year and turned it into something people now do 20 times a day. And unlike our ancestors, we know exactly what it does to us because now we've got the science, and the science is grim. That's basically the ancient version of a sacred family heirloom getting mass produced into a keychain you buy at the airport. So, pull it all together, and when did humans start smoking turns out to be a way bigger question than it sounds. It's not a story about cigarettes, it's a story about fire and curiosity and the impossibly old human belief that smoke is a bridge between you and the sky, between the living and the dead, between the world you can see and the one you can't. Juniper, freezing by that fire 12,000 years ago, was doing something we never really stopped doing. Here's what I keep thinking about though. Of all the things our ancestors could have made sacred, water, stone, the sun, why smoke? Why did burning a plant and breathing it in feel, to people on every single continent, like touching something invisible? If you had to bet on one reason humans first did this, pure accident, deep ritual, or early medicine, which one's your pick? Drop it in the comments. I read them. Because next time, we're chasing another one of these. Why ancient humans started covering their bodies in tattoos, why a 5,000-year-old Iceman was buried with 61 of them, and what that ink was actually for. Trust me, it's not what you think. See you there.